Hello, and welcome to Creating in Color, sharing the creative endeavors of people of color. I'm your host, Kaybe, and today I'm joined with Shruthi, a senior visual designer and illustrator who previously worked with Freshworks Inc., children's textbook illustrations, brand illustrations for software companies, Airbase and Sideways, as well as wall murals at Brand New Studios and Chef Story Cafe in Chennai, India, just to name a few. How are you today, Shruti?
Hi, I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for asking. So, what is a senior visual designer and illustrator? And do you mind going into the difference of the two?
A visual designer is basically anybody who owns like the storytelling aspect for brands, but in visuals. So, a lot of the work that visual designers do is essentially linked to how someone would perceive a brand and how strong can you keep that connection going, because it's not just creating one ad and then just like forgetting about it. You need to make sure that everything that you make for the brand is something that the viewers will sort of remember and associate for a long time. And that's the predominant role of a visual designer. But sometimes visual designers also play a huge role in software and product. And that's the kind of work that I've been doing, which is basically all of us use apps, right? As a visual designer, how can you make that process of using a particular software or an app more engaging using visuals is what I focus on. And a lot of the work that I do is with illustrations, because I feel like illustrations is a great way to sort of simplify really complex concepts and make it easier for people to associate with. So the difference between the two predominantly is that illustrators focus on drawings and visual designers don't necessarily have to. Some of them do, but visual designers are more typography, photographs, and playing with shapes to sort of best depict what they're trying to say.
Interesting. So, you were mentioning how, as a visual designer, you work a lot with app software. Is there any similarities, like crossovers, with a UI designer, or is it just two completely different separate roles?
Well, they are separate roles, but you do work with UI designers very closely, because a lot of the things that you create will go inside the UI that they are creating. So you don't need to know how to use the apps, but it's important to know what goes on in UI design so that you can create, the most perfect designs to fit into those creations.
Oh, lovely. Thank you. How did you get started in illustration?
So I did my undergrad in something called visual communication, which is an amazing course if you don't really know what you want to do in design, but want to explore the different aspects of it. So when I was doing visual communication in my undergrad, I had one particular subject that was fine arts in my first year, and when I was sort of doing that particular course, I realized that that was something that I really enjoyed. So I started looking up storyboarding, because it seemed very interesting and it came up in class, and I was like, oh my god, this is so cool, I want to become a storyboard artist. So that's when I started illustrating, and that's what I set out to be originally. But the market for storyboard artists initially was very little in India, at least at that point when I was studying here. Over time it sort of evolved into me becoming an illustrator, because that was something that had more of a need here. So I sort of started doing illustrations for a lot of these companies for their marketing collaterals and for their walls and things like that, and I kind of fit into it naturally. I kind of enjoyed the whole process. So that's when I was like, okay, I can see where this is going, and I think I want to do a lot of.
That's so interesting that you were originally interested in being a storyboard artist. Had like a few storyboard artists on the show, and on the show, this is a podcast. But I feel like there are some like common thought process when it comes to being a storyboard artist versus
Mhm.
being an illustrator, and it's just very lovely that you like naturally found your way over to illustrations.
I hear a lot of people talk about, how they sort of shifted from illustration to storyboarding or storyboarding to illustration. So that crossover happens quite often.
Do you ever want to do storyboarding again?
I do. In fact, I did do a few, especially when I went to get my master's in the US, and that's where I'm working right now. When I was in college, surprisingly, we had a few projects that involved storyboarding for ads and storyboarding for like short videos and stuff like that. And from that project, I sort of got to work on this tiny side project with a friend where we did like a little storyboard for like a visual poem. So I thankfully have gotten to do a bit of that recently, and it's nice. I'm very excited about what more I can do in that particular space.
I am so excited for you. You are going to have to update us when you are in it and just like how you're feeling about it. I'm very excited.
For sure.
So, when you were studying storyboarding, just because this kind of goes into my other question of if you were interested in other industries, was there a particular industry you were looking at? Like, were you always looking at advertising, or were you looking at live action or animation?
I was actually very seriously thinking animation because I grew up watching a lot of cartoons and anime, especially so much so that I even went like I am still a huge fan of anime. So I learned Japanese, went to classes, and that's the level of interest I had in that field. So that's initially why I started storyboarding, because I really like those moving pictures that I saw on TV. So that was the industry I initially wanted to get into. But over time, I sort of realized that I enjoyed converting a lot more complex ideas into illustrations, because software is something that people think is very especially on the creative side, it feels like a left brain right brain thing, right? Like many people think
Mm-hmm.
that going into IT is very like computational and mathematical, and I'm a creative person. I don't want to be doing that. But I really enjoyed converting what I got from there to here. That's why I sort of stuck with it.
It's also a very, I feel like unique is the wrong word, but that's the only word I can really think of because I never even knew that this was a job that someone who is an illustrator can do.
Hmm.
So it's just very interesting.
Yeah, to be very honest, it's something that I discovered in the process too. I didn't know there existed, a job or a title for someone like me in software. It just so happened that a software company called Freshworks reached out to me when I was working in a design studio, and they said, "Hey, we really like your work, and we feel like our brand is something that could really benefit from fun. So can you help us sort of convert these concepts into something more fun and relatable?" So I was like, hey, this is interesting. Let me give it a go. If I don't really like it, I can, I always have like the other options. So I thought I'd just try. But I really enjoyed it, and I was there for almost 4 years. So I had a lot to learn from that job.
I love it. And are there any other industries that you had an interest in moving into as an illustrator or a visual designer, or that you've already worked in doing?
So one thing that I really enjoyed doing, and I did a lot of this in my free time, was working on wall murals. And of late, there's a huge boom in the number of graffiti wall artists here in India. In the West, it's always been amazing, and it's so beautiful to see. And but in the recent times, things have been developing here like at a huge pace. So it's amazing to see what people are doing, and that's something that I did here and there in my free time. But I would really love to do more of that. Just like do like paint up some walls.
Yes, we need that. What does it mean to be a senior visual designer and an illustrator?
Well, for the most part, I think what you're doing for brand is you're trying to lift the weight of words in a way, because it's easier to sometimes say that, hey, this is what our brand stands for and this is what we do, but a lot of it doesn't come through if it's all words and no visuals. So you're trying to ease that process. So as a visual designer, your role is to sort of get that what the brand is trying to say across in a very efficient way without making it confusing for those interacting with your brand, and not just on one platform. That's the tricky part, because when you say you're working with an app, for example, somebody is looking at an ad on a website, and then they install the app, and then they're interacting with the app, and say then it gets converted to a newsletter. So you're interacting with them on multiple platforms. So as a
Mm-hmm.
visual designer, it's sort of important to keep in mind that you need to give them the same experience throughout all of these different platforms, and that's where you sort of need to be careful about consistency, and that's a huge part of what visual designers do.
Gotcha. What does your daily routine look like?
Oh, right now I work with a company called Postman Inc. And well, we're very flexible here, but it's a great way of working for me. So I usually wake up at around 8:30 or so in the morning, and a lot of the work I do initially in the morning is warm-up sketches. So I just like sketch out a few things that I think will help me get warmed up for the day, and then I get into the tasks that I have to do for the day, and most of the time it involves like ideation sketches, which are really rough and in thumbnail formats, and then I send them over to the people that I work with for feedback or for improvements and things like that. And once we get like a good to go sign, I spend the second half of the day working on converting what I can to actual sketches, and then start coloring them in, and that usually takes about a day or two depending on the size of the project.
I'm wondering, I feel like there is this ideology, I guess, maybe, I don't know, of illustrators being this kind of medium of a production artist and an independent artist.
Hmm.
Do you ever find yourself leaning more towards being an independent artist slash like freelancer, or are you always able to find these production works? And do you have a preference to one or the other?
For me personally, I worked the most with, as a production person, I would say, rather than an independent artist. But I always try to make sure I'm working in such a way that I also have time for side projects. So, I think it'd be best to say I have like the best of both worlds, because I don't see myself constricted to being, a production artist at all times. And preference wise, to be very honest, I really don't have one particular thing that I would do for the rest of my life. I feel like this sort of keeps me going. It's nice because I get inspiration from both. Because one of the biggest difficulties I face as a freelance artist is not being able to work with a team, and that's something that I personally enjoy. I like working with like 4 5 other people who are working towards the same thing. And when you're freelancing, usually you're working by yourself. So for that reason, I really like being with a team.
I'm very happy that you said that because I feel like illustration work really isn't for everybody because some people work better in a team environment versus like a independent environment,
Mhm.
and not everyone realizes that that is something to consider. So thank you so much.
Sure.
What are some specific roadblocks you try to watch out for?
The brief is probably the biggest roadblocker at times. It's also the biggest plus, but a bad brief, or something that gives you a very vague idea of what you're supposed to do, can be very difficult to navigate through, because you don't know what exactly is needed from you, or what it is that the client has in mind. I think that's when this is something that I do, and I'm pretty sure everybody does it. Asking the right questions is very important, and ideally you should be doing that in the beginning. In case there's a bad brief, it's always good to have like a few questions that you want clarified before you start, and that has always been the biggest roadblock for me at times. So but I've found ways to navigate through it, but yeah, that's the biggest problem.
That sounds frustrating.
Well, it is sometimes, because also I wouldn't blame somebody who doesn't know to give an illustrator a brief, because they probably just have something in their mind, and they're like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, this is what I want, and they are not thinking about how much you might know. So I wouldn't blame them entirely for not giving you all the details, but it happens.
Yeah. You're so understanding. I love it. What support or resources do you use or recommend for someone trying to break in?
Oh, something that I used was very simple. I just use a lot of YouTube because, especially for someone who's trying to find out the options that they have, YouTube is a great place to start. Although it can be a little overwhelming, I think it's good to check out everything that's available to you. But in terms of software, I would say Adobe is like the perfect place to start. Knowing like Illustrator and Photoshop is a definite must if you want to get into illustrations and production work. So that's a good place to start. And as for resources in terms of who you can follow and what is trending right now, something that I would go back to was Behance, because that's a site where you see some amazing art and some amazing artists. So that sort of leads you to some of the new avenues in illustration and in art in general.
Very nice. I think they should all follow you also. Great work there. Casually plug that.
Yeah, Shruthi Artgram, guys.
I'm curious about your thoughts about how illustrations, comics, and just art in general can change depending on the software. Do you mind going into that?
Yeah, for sure. I think the software that you use can very heavily impact the kind of art that you produce. For example, something that's happening in the past 1 or 2 years is this boom in iPad art, right? Like, we didn't have iPad or Procreate, which is a software that's used by most artists these days, about 3, 4 years back. And so people relied heavily on Photoshop and Photoshop brushes. And just the amount of time that is saved now from using some of the newer softwares is mind blowing. And you now have softwares like, if I'm not wrong, I think it's an Adobe software called Fresco, and you can create almost the same effect that you would on paper, because they have stuff like watercolor brushes which just like sort of spread. And that is amazing because the softwares that you can use now sort of are almost able to replicate what happens with real painting. So I think it's nice, especially in the initial stages, to explore a few different softwares to see what brushes they offer, what sort of pens they offer, because all of these things, although little, can make a huge difference to the style of your artwork and help you sort of identify what you love doing.
You have an amazing list of experience. How are you able to find so many opportunities?
Well, for me, to be honest, I think I've just been lucky that way. And for the most part, social media has really helped me because when I initially started uploading my artwork, it was on Facebook in 2014. And I started doing that because there was one particular artist I followed called Alicia Souza, and she would do like these tiny little drawings, very cute relatable ones, and she would post one every day on Facebook. And I didn't realize Facebook could be used like that, because I just thought it was like for keeping in touch with friends. So I was like, hey, this is a cool idea, so let me start doing it too. So I did one drawing a day for as long as I could. And around 2015 or 16, some of my, that's when people started talking about it, and they were like, hey, this person draws, maybe we can get her help for X or Y. And that's how Freshworks sort of reached out to me, because one of the HRs in that company was, I think they saw my work and they were like, hey, you know what, we could probably use her. So a lot of the projects that I got were from people discovering my page and discovering, the kind of work that I was capable of doing. It sort of acts as your portfolio, especially now. And with Instagram, it's even more, because you're able to reach out to so many people. That being said, I don't think, that should be the only source of, networking. I think I've also had a lot of benefit from just talking to people and meeting them before COVID. But that was a great way to sort of get more projects and find really creative people to work with, like art fairs or these biennales that happen where you'd meet other people in the creative field.
Speaking of social media, because we found each other through social media, which was a
Mhm.
lovely, beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And I feel like as there, it's a huge platform that's basically like a bunch of artists
Yeah.
trying to like all throw what they can out into the ether. It seems so easy to just kind of be missed, if I can say that.
Yeah.
Do you have any tips for anyone so they aren't just I mean feel free to totally be like, nah, I got nothing. But do you have any tips for anyone to like help them stand out or stick out just a little bit more than maybe someone else?
To be really honest, that's something that I am trying to crack myself because sometimes the how Instagram works is just like it's a mystery. Like I don't know. Like some things I draw in 5 seconds probably get more visibility than something I spent 5 hours on.
What is the deal with that?
Yeah, I'm like, guys, like, wait, what is happening? But uh, I think generally, though, something that I have heard from a lot of my friends, and which I'm trying to do now as well, is we try to, especially with social media, there is this notion that you need to be producing content as much as you can, as soon as you can, just to keep the pace going. But I have tried to do this before because that I thought that was the only way to go about it, but I realized that that sort of affects the quality of your work. I would say that the best way to go about it is to, and it's something that I'm consciously doing more now, is to take time, work on your art, and when you're happy with what you have, even if it takes like 4 days, 1 week, that's when you upload it to social media. Not saying you shouldn't be uploading it otherwise, but if you want to work on your art, I think that would be a better way to go about it. And I've noticed that when you do that organically, if it's even if it's not like in a day, over a few weeks, the number of people who sort of see it, share it, I've noticed that it increases. And I think that's because people do notice quality when it comes to social media, or it's got to be relatable. It's one of these two things. So if you can crack either of these, I think you would stand out.
Easier said than done.
That
Instagram is a
I
huge
agree.
mystery.
I agree. It's very hard because I also feel like the number of people who are on the platform now is so huge. So
Mm-hmm.
it is quite difficult to stand out in that, and also you need to be using the right hashtags and all of that. I think it's there are levels to it now, and there's like a checklist
Yeah.
that you should be following. So I think if you're really particular about, the number of followers and the reach, I think you need to check off every little, box in that checklist, which is hashtags, the time you post it at, and where is your audience. You need to be looking at your insights, what is trending right now, what challenge can you be doing? Because the month I did Inktober, which usually happens in October, that month the number of people who interacted with my artwork was huge. So that's something that people can totally explore because that's also challenging in a way. So it's like it's good for both following and working on your art.
What was your upbringing like?
I had a really good time growing up, no complaints there. And I one of the biggest things that worked out for me was I live in a joint family, and my parents and my aunt and my uncle, they all still live together in India. So growing up around like 10 other people is a lot of fun, and it's a lot of things to observe and pick up from because there are so many different kinds of people living under one roof. And that sort of helped me in my art in so many ways because there was a lot to take from through observation itself. How do people talk to each other in a setting like this? Like, for example, even with things like food, like it was just so, I think that's probably why I sort of lean more towards teamwork because it was so natural. Because it never once felt to me like, these people were struggling to live together. It just was so seamless. And someone would have someone's back. Like, say, if two people weren't able to cook at home, some two others would sort of step in, and nobody had to ask anybody. And that's sort of why I sort of lean towards teamwork, I could say, because that setting really helped me pick up from. And I really enjoy going back home because my cousins still stay there, and it's a lot of fun when we're all together. In so many ways, it helps you sort of talk about things that you're going through. Say you're struggling in life, there's always somebody around you to sort of listen to you.
I 100% feel you. I grew up in a house of seven,
Oh, wow.
and it was like my mom, my aunt, my grandma, and my cousins, and me and our dog. And it's fantastic, and I love catching up with my cousins, and I'm 100% there with you.
Yeah. It's a lot of fun, especially as kids. I think a setting like that really helps because
Mm-hmm.
you don't feel so lonely when you're around so many people, and I think that that's an amazing thing to have.
Yeah, I agree. So, you are the winner of the 2016 Talk Your Way to Japan. First of all, congrats.
Thanks.
How were you able to prepare for an experience like that? And do you feel like anything from that experience, the prep work, the competition, or even the aftermath, translates into your work?
Totally. So, like I said, I started learning Japanese because I was really into anime, and I didn't want to wait for the subtitles to watch my favorite animes. I was like, what can I do? So, some of my friends were like, why don't you just study Japanese? I was like, that sounds doable. But when I started learning it, it was a whole other ball game because it was such a difficult language for me to sort of pick up initially. But 1.5 years into it, I think I had the most amazing teacher. She was from Japan. She was almost 65 years old, and she was living by herself in India and just teaching us kids because she wanted to. And she was not being paid to do it. And I think the amount of love that she showed us in her classes, that was amazing because we fell in love with her, and I learned the language much faster around her. And by the end of it, something that I realized was that, she couldn't speak English, and she would teach us Japanese with like picture cards. So if she was talking about a cloud, she would hold up a cloud and then she would say the word 5 times. So the
Mm.
image just stuck. And that's when I was learning in those classes, I sort of realized how important visuals are in learning as well. Because, it's just so much easier to pick up when there are pictures. And that's something that I carried into, my process of work as well. A lot of times, things that you can't explain are better explained through a comic or through a storyboard. And I think that has really helped. And another thing that really helped me was just being able to interact with somebody who isn't from your culture. And it was such an enriching experience. I learned so much about, the way they eat, the way they dress in Japan, and you feel like you're not so different after all. And that's something I felt even more at college when I was doing my master's in the US, because we were a diverse bunch of students and we gelled like crazy. We had the most fun. We were all so different, but it was so easy to get along because everybody was just understanding of each other's backgrounds. And that really really helps with my work, because I feel like a lot of work I do is trying to talk about people from different backgrounds. They could be developers, they could be artists, and they could all be from different parts of the world, but they're still relating to each other on one topic. And I think being able to describe that crowd through art is an amazing experience.
Thank you so much. Outside of work, what kind of hobbies, side hustles, or interests do you engage in?
I like going on long walks, especially when the weather is nice, because it helps me sort of think and also appreciate, especially since the pandemic. I've started doing more of that because I remember I one day saw this post that said, why aren't you looking at the sunset every day? It's so beautiful. And then that day I went out into my balcony. I was like, why am I not doing this every day? Because it was such a nice feeling to watch the sun go down. And so that's something that I've consciously started doing. But I watch a lot of documentaries otherwise in my free time. I do a lot of Netflix documentaries, and yeah, these are usually the two things apart from uh, drawing that I do. Off late, I'm trying to learn more of cooking. I'm trying to cook a little more than before. So that's going well, I think. I've learned a few dishes that I'm happy with.
I love that. Always supporting cooking. Always, always. What do you feel are the next steps in your journey?
There's a lot I want to do, especially around branding and advertising with relation to illustrations. I feel like there are so many different ways you can tell stories, and I personally feel like illustrations, especially, are something that many people think of as, oh, it's too childish, or it's too fun, or sometimes it can't be taken too seriously, or it's only for the comics, and it doesn't make sense to use an illustration in, say, something very serious. But I feel like there's a lot you can do with illustration in lifting weight off of some serious topics, or emphasizing on the seriousness of it, depending on how you want to use the art. And that's something that I want to explore in depth, and that's something that I want to do. Especially in the last years, I've seen a lot of artwork around some very important social issues, and they're being shared and they're being spoken about. So I feel like art can sort of contribute to these ongoing discussions that are happening around us, and that's something that I really would like to look into, at more depth, so that I can play a part in that too.
Okay, now is the time for rapid
Oh
questions,
my God.
where I'll ask you a series of this or that, or yes or no questions. Some of that might not be true, but don't worry about it. And you will answer as soon as possible. Are
Okay,
you ready?
I will. Cool. Cool. Okay.
All right, here we go. Pancake or waffle?
Pancake.
Nice, good choice. Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Train or plane?
Train any day. Train.
Ooh, I must inquire. You seem so excited about a train.
Okay, this is gonna sound weird, but for some reason, every time I take a train, it feels so soothing. It's just like the train sort of doing the back and forth. It's just very calming, and the flight and the sound that it makes when it's taking off or landing, I find it very, very jarring. The train is always a smoother, calmer ride, according to me. So I would take the train any day.
Yeah. I agree with that. Meat or vegetables?
Vegetables.
Save your money or spend your money?
I don't know. I don't know if there's a right or wrong. I mean, which one to pick, because I would stand in between, but I think I lean towards save your money.
Very nice. What's your sign?
I'm Libra.
Oh, okay. TV or book?
TV now, yeah. TV.
Ocean or mountains?
Um, hmm, that's a difficult one, but I think I'd have to go with the ocean.
Winter or summer?
Summer.
Comic book or comic strip?
Comic strips.
Okay, ninja or pirate?
Ninja.
And would you rather watch a TV show or would you rather watch a movie?
I would rather watch a TV show.
Now, give me a word that starts with the letter M.
Can it be anything?
It could be anything as long as it's not like a pronoun or a
No,
name.
okay, mango.
All right, I'll accept it. Only because they're so delicious.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Shruthi, for speaking with us today. It's been a pleasure. If you want to drop that Instagram one more time for everybody.
Yeah, you can check out some of the art that I create on Shruthi_artgram.
Very nice. Everybody, check it out. Amazing stuff. And thank you, the listener, for tuning in. Please follow Creating in Color on Instagram and Twitter, and feel free to submit any questions for upcoming guests through our social media or creatingincolorcast@gmail.com. If you're interested in following me, you can find me on Instagram, YouTube, and Twitch.com or twitch.tv, that's what's called, at Maybe It's Kaybe. Thanks to Namikaze for creating the ending theme. You can find more of his music on his SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/Namikaze. That's Namikaze. Thanks to everyone for sharing Creating in Color with their friends, family, and coworkers. Creating in Color is a new podcast, and we appreciate any word of mouth. So even helping to push our hashtag on social media, hashtag Creating in Color cast, is a huge help. Before we wrap up, do you have any departing words of wisdom for everyone listening?
I would just say take it slow, work at your own pace, and don't worry too much about being perfect because we all learn in the process. So just have fun while you're making stuff, guys.
You've been spitting truth this entire time and you haven't stopped yet. Thank you so much. This has been Creating in Color. Keep striving, keep trying, keep creating. Bye.
Bye.
Yay!